Ed McCabe, welcome back.
Joe, it's good to be here. Good to see you. I noticed you got like dual purpose drinks today. You got a little caffeine, you got a little coconut water. So if you need to get a little Jack, you're going to drink the caffeine, you're going to have the coconut water. Got
to rehydrate after that coffee, you know what I mean?
For sure.
Ed McCabe, thank you so much for being here again. I know the last time you were here, you've been so impactful for those who are seasoned or young men and women. We needed to know more about how to be a mentor or be mentored by mentees out there. So, or as a mentee, if you will. But now our topic today is going to be a little bit, I'd say, in depth, but also necessary.
Yeah.
We're in election season. If people are watching this 10 years from now, let's say, our former president had an assassination attempt a couple of weeks back, and we're still in the middle of election season. I think we're just under 100 days maybe right now until the election day. But we wanted to hit on this topic, how to turn heated arguments into a meaningful conversation. I know there are several topics that many people don't want to talk about here in the United States. I come from Australia where politics isn't as intense. We can have the conversation and then we'll just let it be. Most will just have a beer over it or something like that. But here, it's intense. There are some good aspects of patriotism, if you will, here in this country, which I do love about this country. But when it comes to politics, religion, many other topics that we can talk about, you don't necessarily want to talk about in a get-together, a grill out, if you will, if you're grilling out with your friends. But before we go into in depth of this topic, what are your thoughts? What are you feeling right now, Ed, as my mentor of what's going on in today's age and with all the things that we're talking about?
Oh gosh, that's such a loaded topic. I mean, there's so many different ways we could go there. I mean, literally, you think about what's happened in the last 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, we've probably never seen before in our society, with the attempted assassination of President Trump. Last night, President Biden, formally spoke to the American public about, him choosing not to run for office for the presidency. So, and there's just so many other things that are going on. But you hit it on the head, I think, honestly, Joe, that, we've become so tribal almost in our country. And, not to be able to have a conversation with people. And I think it's a very timely topic to talk about how do we have conversation, because we should be able to talk. We should be able to share our thoughts, and it's how we grow. It's how we educate ourselves, is by having conversations with people. So I think this is very, very timely because there are certain segments of our population that you can't even have a conversation. They're going to shut you down and say, "No, I can't hear that." I don't want to talk about that. It triggers something in me, right? Which is, I think, wrong in and of itself. I think we should be open to having a conversation, but very much what we want to focus on today, I think, is how do we talk? It's not just what we say, but how do we speak? What are the things that go into that to make sure that it's received well, in the best possible way?
No, that's really good. Yeah, I think we will help those who are watching and listening right now to be more aware. I think awareness is such a key factor in this conversation. So I wanted to hit on this topic here, is the importance of handling disagreements effectively. I know being married after almost 8 years, I have to manage my emotions when it comes to disagreements. But briefly, what would you say in your experience being in, how long have you been married now?
43 years.
43 years, okay.
Yeah. So shout out to my wife, Pam, for putting up with me 43 years.
That's awesome. So with your experience with that, how do you think we could manage disagreements?
Okay, so let me just take a step back and just say, I'm a work in progress too, right? I mean, there are things that I'm constantly working on, but there are some things that I've learned along the way too, and I think one of the things, that I've learned is that, we all have levels of dysfunctionality that we think are normal. And the way we communicate is one of them, can be, right?
Right.
So my thought process as it relates to having a disagreement or a difficult conversation is let's have it and then move on, right? And my wife is very much a processor.
Yeah.
And it took us years to try to figure that out. We would have a conversation, and then she'd just say, I don't want to talk about this. I can't talk about this right now. And we wouldn't delve into the why behind it, right? And I think that's I really, looking back at it, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, is that, it's really good to ask questions as to the why.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But too oftentimes what transpires is we try to win. We want to win the argument, trying to find a solution.
Right.
So she would say, I can't talk about this right now. Well, what I learned later on, what she would share with me, is that I needed time to process. And she would say this. She'd say, if I have to talk right now, I may say something that I'm going to regret later, and I can't take it back.
Right.
And I'm like, let's get it out on the table. Let's work through it. Let's move on. And she would say, I need some more time. So I think it's a good idea, to take a few minutes, or maybe it's even a few hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that I can get my emotions in control, and I can think about what I want to say, so I can say it in a way that's going to be very honoring versus potentially negative or could be denigrating. I mean, we've all had those kind of conversations where we say something, we go like, I wish I never said that, and I can't take it back. It's already out there.
Gotcha.
Right?
I think just a healthy add-on to that is I use words like, let's just take a pause. Let's come back to this conversation, because I feel like we're heated in this moment. And when we're heated, we typically don't think through the process properly. So that's a really good point there.
I just want one other thought. I mean, one of my favorite people in the Bible is Daniel. And I love the way that he communicates. And, you think about, who Daniel was, taken into captivity, his culture, home, family destroyed. He's taken to a culture that he doesn't really know or understand, the most powerful nation on the planet at that time, the Babylonian Empire. And they were trying to require that the Jewish men that were being trained for leadership would have to eat in a certain way. Yep. And so the way that he managed that in chapter 1 of Daniel, I thought was just brilliant. He asked for permission. He said, please test us.
Wow.
Please test us. And I think that's a really critical element, is that when you're asking for permission and you're speaking, and trying to honor people, in that you get a much better response than you do when you make demands or say that I have to do things this way. I think asking for permission and saying please diffuses the situation. Please help me understand why you feel that way. So I think, again, asking for permission, I think, is a critical element in the conversation, difficult conversation.
Really good point. I think what you're alluding to is part of our culture where I work, is where you honor up, down, and around. Whatever you do, whatever you say is always honoring. But Ed, what would you do, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this before, where people will take advantage of you because they'll take you as a nice person all the time, if that makes sense. How would you handle that situation?
Yeah, I think that I want people to think I'm a nice person, but it doesn't mean I don't have a backbone. It doesn't mean that I don't have a position on something.
Yeah.
What we're really talking about is, how do I present my position?
That's
right?
good. Yeah.
So that's what I want to do, is I want to be thoughtful about how I present something, because I want to walk away, hopefully with gaining agreement. But if we can't, at least I want to maintain a friendship if it's at all possible.
Wow.
Right? Because my goal is not to win the argument. My goal is to try to provide a solution and to try to find common ground.
Yeah.
Versus saying, you're here and I'm there and there is no common ground. No, I want to try to explore that. That's why I'm going to ask questions. That's why I'm going to ask for permission to delve into some things that maybe, so that I can become better educated, to better understand where you're coming from. So maybe then we can find a position that's mutually agreeable.
That's so good. I think that's something I'm trying to work on personally, because I do have that strong personality. I have that passion behind me, but I also have to admit they've been through some things. I have to admit, or also be aware of their story.
Yeah.
They may not see it right now. Maybe give it some time as well. That's a really good point. Okay. You talked a lot about communication in this piece. Now I think we can touch on active listening, as it is very important. And I think you alluded to that with your wife, using I statements versus you statements. And there's also techniques for staying calm. Is there anything that you can touch on with certain techniques that we can have when it comes to listening actively?
Yeah, again, I think instead of, I should be actively listening, as you mentioned, but that encompasses a lot of different things.
Yeah.
So instead of thinking about what my response is going to be, I think I should be asking questions so I can further explore why they feel that way or what their position is on something.
Wow.
And so I think that's a critical element. And part of that active listening could be that what I do is I repeat back what I just heard to make sure I understand it.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
So, you might make a statement, then what I might say is, so what I hear you saying is this.
Yes.
Would you agree with that? And so then you're making sure that you have an opportunity to capture what's being said, because sometimes what's being said and what's really actively being meant by the statement are two different things, especially if it's
That's
heated,
so true.
right?
Yeah.
And so there's that element of it. And I think the other thing too that goes along with it that's critical, I would suggest, would also be my facial expression,
Yes.
right?
That's a good
My body language, Am I looking at you and am I smiling?
Yes.
Or am I looking like I'm angry because you made me angry? No. I mean, it's very hard. I'm just saying the things that are ideal. I'm not saying I practice them all the time, because I'm a work in progress. God's working on me too.
Yeah.
But my point is, those are the things that I want to think about, because again, at the end of the conversation, I want to make sure that my relationship with you is still intact. We can differ. And I think that's one of the things that societally is a challenge for us too, is that, we have this tendency to, at times societally, to look at people that may be diametrically opposed to us and automatically assume that they're evil too. And that's not the case,
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
We may have totally different viewpoints, but just because you disagree with me on a particular topic doesn't mean that you're evil necessarily. I'm not saying you can be.
Right.
But my point is, my goal in most everyday relationships is try to learn and ask questions and make sure that I maintain the relationship. And part of that is not just what I say, but it's my facial expressions. Am I leaning in?
Yeah.
Am I ask permission to ask more questions, to delve into things that are going to allow us to both better understand the positions that we're coming from?
That's really good. And I think what you could connect that to is finding common ground with the person. I've been reading this book, Leadership Deception or Self-Deception, I think it was called, where it talks about like typical human beings have a certain amount of things that we can find common ground in. And that could be like, we all have cares, we all have needs, we all have wants, we all fear something. So with that said, Ed, what would you say, like, how do you find those common grounds with anyone that you come across?
Well, again, I think it's being inquisitive, right? And being curious instead of assuming, because we know what assuming does to us, right?
Yep.
So the reality of it is, I think asking lots of questions and being a curious person allows you to better understand people. And I think that's what really great leaders do, is that they're inherently inquisitive and curious.
Yeah, that's good.
And so, like understanding your Fijian background and that you grew up in Australia, and not assuming that the way that you grew up and the things that you experienced in your growing up in Australia are going to be just the same as mine, or that it's going to be
so true,
because we have our own predispositions.
Yes.
Being an American,
right?
We think everyone should think the same way that we do. We're the best. We have this view of things, right? And so, being inquisitive and asking questions, I think, is a critical element of it, and trying to find common ground.
With that, I know we're trying to find common ground, and I know there's a temptation to compromise on your values. Not that most of us will compromise, but there is that alluring factor that makes us want to compromise. What would you say to that? What would you where do you kind of draw the line in the sand? Like, okay, look, this is as far as I go.
No, I think that's a great point. But I think here's the thing. I have to be open in my mind to change and to be receptive to what you're saying. It doesn't mean that I will.
Yes.
But that's why I'm going to ask these questions and try to understand your position and the why behind your position.
Yeah.
And so, that inquisitiveness, I think, is a critical element of it. It doesn't mean that I have to cut corners or I'm acquiescing on my core values or any of those kind of things. But I have to make sure that I'm open to hearing what you have to say, because there's, even in the course of the last 12 months, I mean, there are things that I have thought about because of what I've read or talking to people that I've changed my position on things. It doesn't have anything to do with my love of being American or a Christian, any of those kind of things. But what it has done is change the way I perceive how I might engage with people that are different than I am, right? So
that's really good. Love that. We can talk on role of empathy and understanding, putting ourselves in one's shoes, if you will, understanding full concept and being compassionate, if you will, in our Christian background, as we would say. Have you come across any discussions or conversations around like, look, I know what they're saying and I can to a degree understand where they're coming from, but I do disagree with their view?
Well, I think it's, if I think about, what creates anger in my own heart in a conversation that, it ticks me off or sets me off, whatever verbiage you want to use. I have to take a step back and say, okay, where does my pride fit in all of that?
Wow.
Because I know that I'm a prideful person, and so is it my pride that's creating this response in me? Yeah, right. Because I have this elevated thought about who I am. Yeah. Right. And I think that's a critical element. Is that my pride can cause me to react in a way I shouldn't. It could cause me to try to to discount relationships because I think that I'm right. Yeah. Because of whatever. And so I think that's a critical element. Is I've realized that my getting upset with people in a conversation many times can be directly traced back to my own pride.
Interesting. I had a friend of mine who reached out to me from Australia. Brian and I had a conversation around being prideful or being grateful. Yeah. Anything you could speak towards that, Ed, I think that would be great because, in Australia, when I was in the military, we were proud to be an Australian, proud to fight for our country. But with my viewpoint now, being in America, I realized, look, I am, quote unquote proud, but I think it's more gratitude than anything else because I don't want it to end up being a selfish motive. How would you unpack something like that? Like, is that something you've ever come across where you saw something between the pride, being prideful or proud, and being grateful? Because I know there's some sort of connection there, but I think once you think you're proud to be a certain person, could lead towards a direction that's selfish, if you will.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought the same thing when I thought about this.
I think I have to take a step back and ask myself, if I have pride in something, how did I get here? Because it was never by myself.
Interesting.
It was never by myself. It was interesting. I had the opportunity about a year ago to go to India, and I took Conley, my youngest son, with me. And we had this conversation. We were talking while we were there. And I said, Conley, think about it. I'd ask you to think about this. Yeah. How blessed were you that you were born in the United States? Yeah. Wow. Because we walked around and there were, there's lots and lots of very, very poor people. And we have so many, unbelievable things that we're blessed with in the United States that we lose sight of. Yeah. And, because one of the things that come, I was having a conversation with a guy about this last night, is that, you remember the time you got this brand new car, right? And you're like, I'm driving around in this brand new car, whatever that car was, right? Yeah. But after a while, you don't have that same pride in that because it's become common, yep. Right? Yep. You're used to it. Been driving it a while. Now there's another car, right? So, I think taking a step back and realizing the blessings that you've been given and the fact that it wasn't you. Yeah. You may have worked very hard and all those kind of things, but there are always people that helped you along the way. Like I remember I had my grandmother told me one time, she goes, just always remember this, Eddie. All my family call me Eddie. She said, remember this.
You don't look like an Eddie.
Yeah, I don't. I'm thankful for that. But you meet the same people on the way up as you do on the way down.
Wow.
Yeah. So I try to remember that. I try to keep that in my heart that, whatever God has given me, it's because of his amazing love for me, but it's also because of the people that he's placed in my life that have helped me get there.
Oh, that is a word, Ed. My goodness. I actually heard this the other day. There are certain worldviews that, disagree with what I believe in, of course. And they would say, well, if there is a God, why is there evil in the world? They say things like that. And I heard someone say this, unfortunately, God had an intention for humanity. But unfortunately, the world is reflecting how we are managing it right now. It's not reflecting what the maker wants. It's reflecting how we're managing it right now.
Yeah.
So with that said, do you think with the disagreements that we're seeing in this world today, do you think it's because of how we're managing our society?
Yeah, well, you think about, that the imposition of our will on other people, right?
Yeah.
And instead of trying to find understanding, and that's what happens. It's what's happening in the Middle East. It's what's happening in Europe right now, in Ukraine and Russia, and so on. But you think back to the question that was asked, and you can't have it both ways. You say God's responsible for this, but God created us with a free will. We make choices every day. Like we're talking about how we communicate well.
Right.
It's a choice.
Yes.
It's a choice that I make. Like I want to be honoring to the people that are that God puts in my life, and I want to try to learn, and I want to have a curious mind, and I want to understand why you feel that way, and that's so diametrically opposed to the way that I feel.
Yeah.
And so, and what brought you there, so that we might be able to find some kind of common ground and figure out how do we move forward together. Because sometimes you have to work with people that are have a differing opinion, but you have to find a solution to get through it. Whether it be a negotiation or whatever. Because if you don't find common ground, you don't come to an agreement.
Yeah, that's good.
Right?
Yeah, that's true.
So there's another element of that. It's not just relational in terms of personal relationship, but also it's very much a business perspective that you have to look at and say, how do I find a solution out of this that expands the pie and allows us both to feel like we won?
Interesting.
Right? Instead of saying, because that's why I don't like all those books that say, how to win the argument or how to win the, because I don't want the other person to feel like they lost.
I'm the same boat. Yes.
I want them to feel like maybe it wasn't ideal, but I feel good about the outcome because I got something and we got something. We figured out a way to try to make it better for both of us.
Wow.
Versus I'm going to win this argument and you're going to be dominated for the rest of your life. And I don't care how you feel about it, right?
I feel like that's the sales realm right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting.